WFSB Plus original. This is the Capitol Rundown.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kara Sundlin. Welcome to the Capitol Rundown. This is where we bring you politics from both sides of the aisle. And I'm here with Themis Klarides, who is the former House leader for the Republicans. And I'm also here with Jimmy Tickey, who is a Democratic strategist. So we're going to talk about some of the biggest issues making news right now, break them down for you from both sides. So appreciate you both being here. To our insiders, Jimmy Kimmel's back on the air. Revolution Wind and CT is back on track. So we're going to start with lots of things. Let's start local with Revolution Wind. We talked about it on this program that the Trump administration pulled the plug in literally the 11th hour. And we've been reporting, Luke Hydash has been reporting that, hey, the workers thankfully didn't get laid off. The work is already back on. Revolution Wind is happening. And this is really due because the court said to President Trump, you can't do this. You can't stop it now. Is that right?
Right. Well, the company Ørsted, who's the main part of this this offshore wind off of Connecticut and Rhode Island, obviously went to court. And they went to court in the District of Columbia and the district court down there. And the judge, now this was an administrative hearing, right, which is different than a criminal hearing or a civil hearing. And the standard that the judge has to look at as to what the regulatory agency decided, when they decided to close this down is it arbitrary and capricious? Meaning arbitrary, like you just made a decision willy-nilly, and capricious, like there's no reasoning for it, there was no evidence, it wasn't based on any evidence. And this judge not only held it was arbitrary and capricious and therefore should be overturned, and therefore the project can start again, as you said, but he said it was the height of arbitrary and capricious. So it was so extreme what he saw, and he said there was no evidence as to why. Because when you make a decision, a regulatory agency makes a decision, say we're closing down this wind project, you have to give a reason. And then the other party has to have time to, quote, cure it, which means fix it. You can't fix something that you don't know what the reason is, right? So they gave no reason, and there was no ability to fix it. And they held that it would be irreparable harm, because as we talked about last week, this was $5 billion in the making in the past 10 years put into this project. And they said it was, I think, $2.3 million per day the companies would be losing, in addition to all the jobs that we lost, in addition to all the people that would get power from this project. Yeah. So that was a very, very strong decision and wording by that judge. And the Trump administration said they're going to appeal, which is not surprising. But based on this administrative decision, anything can be overturned, and you don't know what will happen, but it's very strongly worded, and it would be very difficult to overturn, I believe.
Jimmy, there was also strong words about the New York Times lawsuit being thrown out, saying, and that was from a judge who was appointed by former President Bush. So we're sometimes seeing judges throwing out these lawsuits, but yet President Trump just said yesterday maybe he should sue ABC over Jimmy Kimmel. So we'll get to Kimmel in a moment, but what's your take on the work starting again, and also what's been going on with the administration stopping things?
Well, the work starting again is great, and that's what we wanted. We always wanted this work to continue. It's an offshore wind project that was years in the making with significant investment, hundreds and thousands of jobs through either direct employment or through all the suppliers that play a role. All the onshore projects were already completely built out. The offshore was over 80%. So on Labor Day weekend, for these guys and gals to get the word that they're out of a job and for this project to be stopped was really terrible and willy-nilly. So it is a temporary court injunction. We won at the court level, and by we, I mean really the state of Connecticut. So it was a win for Connecticut. It was a win for those that want to see some addressment of our energy prices, which was good for Connecticut and good for Rhode Island, in bending those costs down and investing in wind and renewable energies. But what we have seen, as you mentioned, is that this president time and time again will use his own bully pulpit, his office, his White House, or even some agencies to go after others. And we don't elect a king in this country, we elect a president, and there are some checks and balances in the government. And so many of the court cases we have won so far, we, the people, have won. Our Attorney General in Connecticut has been all over this. Other states have as well, to make sure that if something happens on a day where suddenly a project you were counting on for years, or any sort of flood mitigation programs we've seen, anything around resiliency, anything that mentions the environment or wind, is often cut. And so we need to fight back. We need to show that these projects are important. They actually play a role. They can help with energy costs. They can help with flood mitigation, addressing our environment and our climate change. So far, so good in terms of winning at the court level, but we haven't really seen the end of this, because if the administration does decide to appeal, as I said they would, and fight this, we'll see how it ends up. But for right now, that the work is back on track, that people are back in their jobs, and that this project is being built out. And this was really bipartisan. People across the board from Connecticut and Rhode Island said, we want this program and this project to continue.
Both of you give it a thumbs up. It's a bipartisan decision.
I mean, listen, there are very differing opinions on whether renewable energy, like wind, solar, et cetera, are worth the money, so to speak. Okay,
Yes.
because you have to make sure the wind blows, or else you don't get any windmills moving, right? You have to make sure there's sun out. So that's a separate discussion in my mind. You have a business decision that has been in the works for 10 years, $5 billion down the road. The new London port was built out to the point that it will be the #1, offshore wind port in the Northeast. All these people are working, more jobs. And so if you want to say, if this president decides, I don't like wind, there will be no more approved going forward, that's his prerogative. But to stop a project that far down the road, he's a businessman, and he understands that that's bad business, because then these people were less likely to invest in Connecticut and our area going forward. The other issue is that adding to that arbitrary and capricious standard, he didn't just end all wind projects. Some he ended, stopped, and some he didn't. It's very arbitrary. And the last thing I'll say is, this was a Ronald Reagan appointment, this judge. This wasn't some, as Donald Trump would put it, some liberal, left-wing, person that doesn't agree with us, meaning him. This was a Republican appointee.
Yeah. Let's move on to Jimmy Kimmel. He's back on the air. He used his monologue to fight for free speech. If you live here in Connecticut, you didn't see it on our ABC affiliate, because Nexstar is still, what Jones Channel 8 is still not running Kimmel, neither is Sinclair. About 25% of American homes will not see it. There's a lot of layers to this. Of course, Nexstar wants to get a merger approved by the Trump administration. But I want to let's start with you, Jimmy. What's your take on government getting involved in what broadcasters say, and what did you think of what Kimmel said last night?
So I was able to watch it, but through the New York affiliate, based on my own location. So it's a shame that local affiliates are not airing it. I mean, this gets to the topic of freedom of speech. You might disagree with what someone says. You may disagree with what someone says, and they might have a TV show. You don't have to watch it, but that is our freedom of speech in this country. And it is dangerous and it's worrisome when a federal administration could weaponize their own departments to go after certain TV shows or networks, or encourage affiliates to not show those very shows, knowing that those affiliates at some point or another are going to have business before the federal government. That gets us into the many layers you mentioned about the FCC, about potential mergers. You really have to follow the money when it comes to efforts like this, and we have freedom of speech. And for a president who had a lot to say about cancel culture a couple years ago, now if someone doesn't say anything that is not completely rosy about him or his administration, suddenly there is some kind of cancel culture around that person, for affiliates not to show them, for a show not to be shown. Listen, we all have different personalities. There's different freedoms of speech. You might not agree with what someone says, but that's our country, that there is a network for it, and that there is a public opinion and a public marketplace of ideas. I also think some people are very accustomed to hearing their own opinions repeated to them. I think we've gotten really used to that with social media.
Well, it's because the algorithms just send you more of what you want.
Exactly. It knows what you want to hear. And so you're really being shown an agreeable algorithm where it's something you often agree with. It makes you feel good because you agree with it. But we need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable sometimes, and making sure that I don't agree with what that person says, but that they do have a right to it in our country. And it is one of our main tenets as a country that we do have freedom of speech. It's why we are able to do this show. It's why it's able to be broadcast, that we could have different opinions. But at the end of the day, we can know I might disagree with a person, but they have a right to say what they want to say.
Themis.
Listen, we have to go back to some form of decorum and decency in this country. I mean, as somebody in elected office who was known as being the person who said what she thought, has said what other people were thinking but wouldn't say, certainly fought with people, yelled at people, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's good to disagree. It's good to argue. It's good to walk away and say, I don't want to talk to you until tomorrow because I need to cool down. But that's how we learn, right? That's how we develop things. And if we don't develop some more decorum, go back to a world where we can all say what we want to say, but we're not then going to be called names or being threatened death or, God forbid, killed, where will we be? Secondly, using the FCC, which is the regulatory group that regulates radio, TV. You know, it tells you
Yeah.
what you can and can't do.
We rely
Right.
on the license, and we
Right.
have to do certain educational
Right,
programming.
exactly.
But the FCC doesn't generally tell us what we have to say or do.
But they also can't say you have to fire Jimmy Kimmel or you have to fire Kara Sundlun. What they can say is, you know what, maybe we'll revoke your license. You know what, you want to merge this station with that station, maybe we're not going to agree with that. And bad enough, they did that. You know, they implied that. But then they said, we'll either do this the easy way or the hard way. So now the FCC is an arm of the president, and I get it's his appointment, but you also are a regulatory agency. It's your job to, like, kind of call balls and strikes. So now we're using government arms to control what people are saying. And I will tell you this, as somebody was in elected office for many years, I've had death threats. I've had people call me names. I still have people call me names. Do I like it? No. Do I wish I could stop it? Yes. Do I want to go and, like, slap somebody in the face when they do it? I do. But I don't, because I have a general understanding that that's not what reasonable people do. And I understand the president doesn't like when people make fun of him or disagree with him, but it's part of the job of being in office. Guess what? You won. You're the president. Now you're going to use your power to bury everybody that didn't agree with you, because here's the problem. And you have never heard me say this, and you'll probably never hear me say this again. I agree with Senator Ted Cruz. He said it may feel good to punish Jimmy Kimmel, but you will regret it in the end. Because when there were Democrats in control of the president's office and the administration, and people like Roseanne Barr and Meghan McCain and all sorts of people were quote unquote canceled, even though I agree with some of the things they said were inappropriate, no question about it. Now we're in control and we're doing the same thing. This is a First Amendment right. Of all the constitutional rights we have, the freedom of speech is what separates us, I believe, mostly makes us not China and Cuba, where you get put in jail or killed for saying what you think. And if we're not going to support those rights, whether we're in power or the Democrats are in power, who are we then as a country?
Yeah,
and kudos to people for really speaking out and then doing something about it. I mean, I saw a lot of people canceling their Disney Plus subscriptions. I mean, it's really up to people. These are those moments in American life where something happens and how do people react? And I think there was clearly such a reaction in those first 24 to 36 hours that got the station, ABC and Disney thinking, which then brought Kimmel back on last night.
But you know what the silver lining was to me? And I think you'll probably agree with me as people involved in politics. That were people, celebrities, or individuals that came out and said it. But there were Republicans, elected officials, including Senator Cruz and other people, that came out and said, if we do not support the freedom of speech, whether we're in power or they're in power, where are we?
Yeah.
Right. Like I just said.
So there could be agreement
on
that
called
would be one
checks
place
and
we could
balances.
come together.
That's why we have checks and balances of power, that the executive branch can't just do whatever they want.
Well, you're seeing some daylight between even some Republicans and then this president, seeing there will be life after President Trump, and we need to stand for the tenets of this country.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing, it's interesting because it really wasn't across party lines. You've got Joe Rogan also coming out, who was someone who supported President Trump and even helped deliver voters on his podcast, and says, we cannot do this.
It would be like a
anti-American.
Democratic president saying, when the time comes, I don't know if his podcast should be distributed through different networks because of things he said.
But the shame of this situation is when Roseanne Barr said what she said. Now, I completely disagree with what she said, and it was wrong. But when she said it and her show got canceled, Jimmy Kimmel was one of the first people to stand up and say what ABC did was right. They should absolutely do that. It was wrong. We can't stand for this kind of stuff. So when you've been beaten down for many years and then all of a sudden you have the power, human nature, I get it's hard to be the one that does the right thing. But you also can't be a hypocrite. And when people like that are hypocrites, he's got to either agree with they did it to her or agree they did it to you.
I mean, so it could work both ways. And also, I'll just end on this, that our general understanding, at least things are changing with political parties and alliances are changing, but conservative values have usually meant smaller government influence, which would seem to me that you would do less regulation on speech.
And less stomping on the Constitution.
So anyway, let's move on to a different topic, the government shutdown. With all of this disagreement going on, is it more likely we might actually see a shutdown? Usually we fix this in the 11th hour.
Usually that does happen. I don't think anyone wants to see a shutdown, but we also need to see negotiations. We were just here a couple of months ago talking about this because it does seem like every 6 to 9 months we're dealing with what's called a CR, continuing resolution. We continue the government funding to keep government open. And in March, there was a lot to say about some Democrats that voted on a Republican budget that the president wanted that, unfortunately, Democrats were not brought to the table. There does seem to be something different in the air this time around. The president obviously has the White House. He obviously has the House of Representatives. But when it comes to the Senate, Republicans are in control of the Senate, but you do need to get to that 60-vote threshold. And so in order to do that, you need to have some Democrats. If you're going to need a Democratic vote, you have to talk to Democrats. This has always been the way, no matter who's in the White House or what party, that you have negotiations. Not everyone will get what they want. Frankly, the majority party will probably get most of what they want, but you have to talk to the other party to figure out, how do we want to fund government? What are the levels? Democrats were completely shut out in March, and yet some still supported a government funding, and that brings us now to September 30th. And if Democrats are not a part of the negotiations, if this White House is not working with them, then you might see Democrats work together to not support a budget if they were not a part of the conversation.
But on the other hand, Chuck Schumer compromised last time and got a lot of flack of being compromising. Does that mean you're going to see less compromise?
They want to say, have us in the room, have us at the table, tell us your priorities. We want to share with you ours. Senator Schumer voted for that last time without really getting anything that the Democratic agenda wanted. You have to at least bring in our leaders and have a conversation. You cannot shut us out while the Republicans have the White House, the Senate, and the House. When you pass a budget, to get to that 60 votes in the Senate, you have to get some Democratic votes. And so we want to be a part of the conversation. Democrats should be negotiated with over the coming days so that we don't have a government shutdown, but you have to be able to talk with us, and you can't, run the whole board without involving the minority party in these negotiations.
Themis?
And a few years ago, I'd be saying exactly what Jimmy's saying now, because when the Democrats were in control, they did the same thing to the Republicans. This is back to tit for tat, whether it's, the Jimmy Kimmel thing, whether it's the budget. It's always the same thing.
Don't they say an eye for an eye leaves everyone blind? That's what my mom taught me.
Republicans are saying, that Democrats want to just blindly extend Obamacare, Obamacare things, and the Republicans are saying, we're not saying we don't want to talk about it, but there's got to be some reform to it. That Democrats are saying they want to get rid of the rural hospital funding. That's a big issue for a lot of people in this country that don't, as two people that are on a small hospital board, we're lucky in Connecticut. I mean, although there's rural areas, it's not like people are hundreds of miles, from a good hospital and health care. I mean, these are important issues. So, I know Senator John Thune, I heard him talking about it today. They've agreed to continuing resolutions many times in the past when Democrats are in control. They want them to agree to this continuing resolution, and then they will sit down and talk about it. Now, if they don't come to an agreement, that's another story. We have to come to some agreement to move forward, and then the Democrats get beaten up for agreeing, and the Republicans get beaten up for agreeing. But this is a legislative process.
Okay, so just so people at home understand, we have till September 30th.
Right. Yes.
And give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you think the government is actually going to shut down. Give me a thumbs up if you think it's shutting down.
I don't know yet. I think the conversations over the coming days are really going to be critical to see can they get to a negotiation to fund the government for several more months.
But we can agree to a continuing resolution, which is kind of like a middle of the road. It's not we've agreed to a budget and voted on a budget, but we've agreed to continue talking.
And it's not just kicking it down the road.
And government doesn't shut down. So that's kind of like, I'll give a little, you give a little bit.
I'll end for a fun story with our viewers, is that, and I don't know if it's still happening, but when I was an intern at the White House in 1995 and the government shut down under Clinton, the only people allowed to go to work were the interns and the volunteers. So I went in, and so did the volunteers, and our bosses, sort of off the record, would call and tell us what to do because nobody paid was allowed in. So it's possible the government will be getting run by interns and volunteers for a couple of days.
You're running the country, Kara.
I sent out a lot of faxes. It was faxes back then. Okay. So that'll be as we close the show. Does that really hurt our economy? I think most people just concerned with inflation, with everything else about their pocketbooks. Would a government shutdown push us even farther down the road of maybe toward a recession or anything that we couldn't come back from?
Well, it's certainly not helpful. You would see TSA employees and other federal government employees be furloughed or have to work without pay. Now, that's not very motivational if you have to go into work and not be paid. So then do people start calling out sick? Do you see lower staffing levels?
Yep.
Do checks that people count on from the federal government begin to get slowed? It would be a phase-in process as soon as the government shut down. down, and people would start, feeling the effects.
And it also depends on how long the shutdown is for. That's why a continuing resolution that will push this forward to the middle of November, so say another 7 or 8 weeks, so they can negotiate and figure out what I can live with, what I can't live with, so they can get a budget together and move forward.
Themis, Klarides for the Republicans, Jimmy Tickey for the Democrats. Thank you, as always, for an invigorating show on the Capitol Rundown. You can watch it at WFSB.com. Click on local news, or it's always streaming right here for free on WFSB Plus. Just look for the little tab up there, and you can watch past shows as well. This is where we break down the politics that matter to you from both sides of the aisle, doing our little part to hopefully instill some compromise in the world. Thank you so much.
And bring back decorum.
Bring back decorum. Yes, look, they're going to both be friends after this
See
show.
that? Believe it or not.
All right, have a great day, everyone. I'll see you coming up on Eyewitness News at 4.